The sound in that house was the kind that made you listen for it, even when it wasn't there. Not wind, not mice, not the ordinary murmurs of wood settling. It was a dry rasping, small and constant, like teeth worrying a thread. It traveled the moldings and stairwells. It hid in the folds of drapery and under the stiff bellies of the parlor chairs. If you sat very still and tried to hear beyond it, other noises stepped forward. The iron-lunged frogs down in the swollen ditch, the whisper of silk petticoats along the floorboards, the faint wet lap from the dye vats out back when the night was so quiet it could hear itself breathe. The air itself was a cloth held too near the steam kettle. What was green in the wallpaper was alive. You could smell it, a sharp sweetness that sugared your tongue, and something mineral under it that made the gums want to peel away from the teeth. They brought me to that house because I had quick hands, and because the dressmaker who had come before me had given up both drink and God, and collected instead a cough that drowned her. When I climbed from the wagon, the heat unrolled itself like a blanket left over a fire. The house lay white and long on a shallow rise above the canebrake, its roof black as a soaked hat. The porch spindles climbed like ribs around it, buzzing held to the shade, as if the sun were a dog that had learned to hunt. "My name is Ruth," I told the boy who took my carpet bag, though he had not asked for my name. His eyes were sharp and curious and slid quick to the driver when I said it, to see if my name mattered to anyone. He was the one they sent from the yard to fetch and carry for the big house seamstresses. He wore pants too short for his ankles, and a shirt that had been turned twice at the collar, the stitches tiny and strict. I'd know those stitches anywhere now, even with my eyes closed. They led me up to the sewing room at the crown of the house, where the walls leaned in like listeners. A door in the eaves was latched shut with a length of rawhide slick with many hands. The heat held itself in the pitch line of the roof. The tables were scarred and bright with spilled tallow and wax and whittled chalk, and by the window stood a dress form with a bodice pinned to it like skin pinned to a rack. There was already a woman in the room, long and thin and quiet as a cut shadow. When she lifted her head, the light took her eyes and did not give them back. Her hands were brown and narrow, and had the same white scars from needle pricks as mine, the same small armored caps of skin at the sides of the fingers, where the thread saws at you day after day. There was an iron thimble on her middle finger that was not store-bought but hammered from some other purpose. The dull pewter shine of a spoon bowl, maybe, or a pocket tin. Her headscarf was the color of the river when the sky turned old pewter. She sat with her back straight as a coat rack and watched my eyes take the room. "Dinah," the boy said with a care in the saying. "Miss Ruth is sent up from Hardin to help you." She said nothing at all to me right then, but the boy lingered long enough that I noticed him noticing that she wasn't speaking, and then he left as if he'd forgotten he could. Later, down in the kitchen, I heard someone call her hoo-hoo, the way the owls call out in the sycamores by the slow water. It was not a name said in love or in comfort. It was the way people name something that haunts them but is still needed every day. I had a needle kit of my own, bone case, steel needles, a single silver-headed pin my mother had set in my hair the day I ran, thread wrapped around wooden spools, a tidy roll of wax. I unwrapped it as if revealing my better self. People forgive you many lacks if your work is better than theirs. I had learned to be exact to the point of unkindness. I had learned it so I could feed myself, and then I had learned to make the exactness gentler, because people ask less of you when you are pleasant. "Put that there," Dinah said at last, and her voice was deep and steady, and it made the small hairs at the back of my neck think of the riverbanks at night, those mud-silent places where water and air trade secrets. There is work and more behind that. She wound thread from a skein into a tight skein ball with a practiced tug and tuck of the wrist. The spool she used was not of the same wood as the rest. The grain was dark and straight and fine. If you looked, it was not quite round, as if it had once been something else. Mistress Fitch came up late in the afternoon to inspect and complain. She was young still and bright and brittle, with skin as pale as a peeled almond and a dress the color of new leaves. She said she had a headache, but her voice carried, and when she touched the wallpaper it left a perfect white handprint in the green like plaster under moss. The Paris shade is the very latest, she said, in case we had not seen advertisements. My cousin sent it. There's to be a harvest supper when my husband returns from town. I am to be the envy of Breckenridge County if I must throttle my seamstresses to do it. Dinah, do not use that coarse thread on the bodice. Do I have to say these things? I want stitching so tight it keeps out flies. Yes, Dinah said without question, painted flattery. It will keep out flies. Mistress Fitch's headache crept through her eyes and settled like a little bead of sweat above her lip when she looked at me. Ruth, she said, testing my name on her mouth. Hardin, I knew a woman there who, no matter, if your fingers shake you may hem, if they don't you may backstitch this gourd panel and not make my breath catch when I bend. My fingers don't shake, I said, and for proof I took up the panel and set my knuckles just so, and entered and returned the needle over and under so that the backside looked better than the front. Even being watched, my hands did not betray me. Good, she said. You may keep a pitcher of water here. The heat would fell a horse. But don't let anyone douse those vats. Mr. Fitch says it sets the color. When she went it felt as if the temperature dropped a degree, and something that had been holding its breath remembered how to exhale. Dinah watched me watch the door without moving her head. You say Hardin, she said after a long while, her eyes on the needle she was worming with thread. Where is your people there? Gone, I said. What people I had? Fever, then debt, then I left. She made a small accepting click with her tongue. The iron thimble blinked once when the light shifted. You are not the first woman who comes into a place with only your name and your needle. What do they call you? I asked, though I had already been told, and the asking seemed a way to meet her halfway. Dinah. And also, they call me everything, she said quietly. They call me who. She looked at me then in a way that was not permission but something like testing. You hear the owls at night, Ruth, from nowhere. I hear them, I said, and did not say that a voice in them sounded like my older sister who had died when it was just her and me and the landlord at the door, and how I had refused to open it until the landlord opened it himself, and he had been so gentle with my sister's cold head that I had wept hotter than I knew I could. You will hear them here, she said. They like this place. Things eat and do not eat all the time. Things die and do not die all the time. They'll sit in the big pecan and talk about it. I bent over my work and said nothing because I had a habit of ruining talk when I talked too much. When she stitched, Dinah's lips moved the way some women pray, soundless and with a patience that tells the prayer it is being attended to by a better mind than the one who asked. Once, her thread broke. She touched the raw end to her tongue and tasted it as if testing what was in it. Not in the thread exactly, but in the work it was doing. There was something about her that made the room turn a little to keep her in its center. Days were a series of hems and gussets and seams. The needle traveled through cotton that had been washed in lye and creek water and hammered dry on flattens, through silk that frayed like river grasses when split, through wool that held heat like a body holds heat. I learned the boy's name was Jonas. He ferried pieces and pins and messages with the careful speed of a surgeon's apprentice. At nightfall, when the steps below us rang with the household going to and fro, he would bring the oil lamp and set it just so by the creased pattern, and when Dinah nodded so small you'd doubt you saw it, he'd lean closer to the dress form and speak soft to it like a horse to learn its smell. He would be tall, he would be quick. He had a laugh like a handful of marbles, but he was careful with it and seldom let it fall out of his mouth. Strange things, small and not so small, began to make their home with us. On the third day I noticed a smear of white along the hem of Mistress Fitch's green dress. It looked like chalk at first, or flour. I brushed it with the back of my finger and the flesh there puckered as if I'd touched a hint of fire. Dinah watched me flinch and said nothing. On the fourth day Jonas left an apple on the windowsill for us, and by evening a slick bloom had crept over half its skin, a green so tender it seemed to bruise the air around it. When we cut patterns on the floor, the cuttings lifted of their own accord in the smallest draughts and dusted the ankles like moths. The seam allowance marks at the bodice's edge made a neat dotted path, and if I looked too long it made me sick to my stomach, as if I'd followed a path around and not realized it. Once, I pricked my thumb. It happens. Blood beads. You lick it. You false stitch over it. But when I transfixed my needle through again, the hole it left in the cloth felt hot against the pad of my finger, and when I held it up, a whisper of smoke rose from it like breath on a chill day. I went to the window to see it better by the light. In the water trough under the eaves, the surface was furred green as a moss pie. The dye vat beyond it breathed a delicate gull of steam. The smell there was sharp and sugar metal, a thing that made my tongue feel big in my mouth. You are making a face, Dinah said. Mistress's green makes people taste pennies. What dye is it? I asked. It's not the indigo I've used, nor fustic. It is Paris, she said, making no effort to hide her scorn. From Mr. Fitch's friend in Louisville, who knows all about the new city colors. They sent it rolled in paper with little cherubs on it, kissing someone's finger. You roll it into the kettle, and it kisses everybody in this house. It kisses until it's in your bones. Is it safe? Safe for who? She asked, and gave me a look I had met only a few times in my life. Long ago, when my sister had looked at me over the guttering wick and told me not to marry the man who wanted my hands but not my heart. It was a look that carried a ledger and a debt and wouldn't let me say I hadn't known. That night I did not sleep up under the roof as I had the first 2 nights. I took a straw tick in the room off the kitchen, and kept one hand on my carpetbag's handle while I dreamed the wallpaper had come loose in long strips, and slid down to fold itself over my face like a hand. On the 7th day a guest came, a preacher with grey lashes and a new black suit that smelled of moth chalk and heat. He stayed only a little while in Mistress's sitting room, his words rolling up the stairwell like marbles again. When he left, Jonas darted up with a message and a smile he couldn't keep to himself. He says marriages. He confided breathlessly. He says baptism. He says all is God's plan. What does he say about the whipping shed? Dinah asked, quiet as ever. Jonas looked suddenly at the floorboards as if he could see through them and map where the shed would be. He was a boy long practiced in finding a path between truths. He says we must be sweet. He said, then God will see us. God sees, Dinah said. God's looking makes him tired and sore to his bones. He sits sometimes and thinks, I would sleep, but these people keep hollering their prayers in my ears. She smiled a little then, and when Dinah smiled it lived in the lines of her face like something that had been there brewing a long time. Don't let your prayers holler, Jonas. Stitch them in with your inside voice. He grinned again. Quick. The way a fish flips a silver belly and is gone. Yes, Mum. We sewed for the supper that had not yet been set. Those who ate in the kitchen prepared for those who would not see the kitchen. The mistress's gown grew day by day in the shape of what she believed would make her immortal for an evening. The bodice took the light, and made a small sweetness of it and gave back the rest. Each sleeve was a bell too small for ringing. There were rosettes meant to sit along the bodice line like a row of teeth in too small a mouth. The skirts were a weight to hold a woman to the earth, like coins sewn into the hem to keep a corpse down in the grave. When did you come here? I asked Dinah once when the room had settled into the kind of silence that was not ignoring but acceptance, the way two people can be within arm's length of one another, and not touch hands and not wish that they did. When I was 10, she said. From a place where the land is flat and you can see the weather coming 2 days before it comes. They put me with the woman who sewed because I had hands for it. I had a child when I was 13. They sold him when I was 15. I looked for a man to suffer who did it, and he lived in a far city.
You can't get a hand on someone behind all those walls, behind so much white. So I made other plans. I thought of all the stitches I had put in, all the hems that had fallen on the backs of the paw, all the sleeves I had set in men's shirts that held their arms out to push, to strike, to lift a hand and call that lifting favor. I had early been a girl who believed work could save. I had been raised on that belief. Work is a ladder, but sometimes it only lifts you to a higher window from which to watch yourself. I wanted then to ask her about her plans, but the question felt like a thief reaching into an occupied hand, so I did not. The house had an attic door kept locked. The rawhide thong hung from it like a tongue. If you went near it, an eddy of cool air kissed the sweat at the base of your throat. Some draft worked itself through from eave to hidden space. Jonas had once put his eye to the keyhole and been caught and thrashed by the overseer for his curiosity. He told me the whipping shed smelled like old umbrellas. He told me the overseer's hands were smooth as a woman's because he used the whip more than the hoe. In the afternoon heat, the green along the walls bloomed. The wallpaper patterns were vines with feathers on them and clusters of small berries. The berries were the exact color of Mistress Fitch's lips when she had 2 glasses of claret. I had been in rooms where fabric mildewed before it dried, where frogs shipped themselves in along the wool bales and lived for 2 weeks under the carding tables. This was like that and not like that. Your body learned to live without air in small bites. Your mouth learned to go dry to protect itself. Do you see that? I said once to Dinah when the afternoon had slid into that white hour when everything in the room draws itself in closer. What? She said, and I had to look and look before I knew how to say it. The stitches, I whispered, though no one was near. That whickering, that small noise. It's there sometimes when you leave the room. She cocked her head, but not to me. I hear it, she said. I hear everything. What is it? Listen to it, she said. What does it say? I listened until the words I was making from it embarrassed me. Then I let go of the need to make words. When you stop trying to read noise as language, other things in it become possible. It was a soft bite and pull. It was the small sound of a mouth working against something that resists. It was mice chewing, and yet I knew there were no mice here because Dinah would not tolerate them. It was birds worrying their feathers. It was bones. It was the sound of the house sewing. I woke one night with my palms smarting. I had slept with them flat under my cheeks, and all night I had dreamed needles went through them and into my tongue. When I rose, there was a mark at one corner of my mouth, and the taste there was not blood but something bitter and tinny. The owls spoke through the open crack of the window. Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all? There were 3 of them by the sound of it, and one of them made a noise that was like a laugh at the end of the call. Do you hear them? I whispered to the room, ashamed and foolish. Yes, Dinah said, already awake, her hands folded over her chest. Her hands did not look asleep when she slept. They never gave themselves permission. They are talking over the job. What job? They do the counting. They put eyes on what men will not. They carry names on little soundbacks. We call and they carry. They bring back a call with our names on it. Who? To whom? To what end? To who is this hurt owed? We sewed for the harvest supper that could not decide on a date. Mr. Fitch sent word he would be home from Louisville for certain on the 19th. Then he wrote again. He would be late by 3 days. The message came on paper gritted with dust. The men came up from the field with feathers stuck in their hair from where a bird had fallen in the canebrake and Jonas had chased it. They handed me scraps to mend because the whip had torn shirts, and they had learned the trick of standing so that the welt was out of sight. No one lined up with the green wallpaper to have their photograph made, and yet every afternoon I felt a little squaring up of the room, as if a camera had been put in the hall and the house had lifted its chin. A week before Mr. Fitch's return, I found a stitch on the underside of the green skirt that was not like the others. It was finer than any I could make, and laid one over another so that from a small distance it appeared to be a secret. When I looked closer, I saw that it spelled out something, a piece of a word. The thread was dark brown, not the green. It lay flat and humble like hair. The letter I could make out was L and then O next to it, and then a curve that might become U. I saw my own hand reach, and I pressed my thumbnail under the stitch to pick it up. It resisted, and then it gave, and the way it let go made me imagine it had snapped around the insides of my thumb like a noose. "What did you take out?" Dinah asked. She was on her chair and had not raised her head. That voice went along the floor as speedily as a spider and found me. "Attacking Stitch," I lied, because a lie is sometimes an experiment and you want to see what type of life it will try to have. She put her needle in the cushion and looked at me until I shut my eyes. "Don't take out what you don't understand," she said, and when I opened my eyes again there was nothing in her face but patience. I thought. I began, unsure of how to be honest in a house that made honest things punishable. "This is for me," she said, "and for the ones to whom I promised. That stitch is not yours. You may have 1,000 others and keep them in a jar if they please you." I spent the next day feeling a stitch pricking the inside of my lower lip, like splinter cellar guilt. In the afternoon I went to the well and wound up a pail and stood with it a long time looking down into the cool eye there. On the well lip someone had scratched with a nail, faint, the shape of an owl or of an eye, or of a thread spool with a slit. "I will put it back," I said out loud. "The next time I find you I will not look like a thief." There were other small things. A dog would not come inside and whimpered to be tied to the pump instead. 2 boys on the place came up with a rash that looked like lace. Mistress's headache crept into her eyelids and lay there, heavy. She drank vinegar and smiled without her eyes. The wallpaper pressed a green thumbprint onto the collar of Mr. Fitch's older daughter Ada, when she leaned there to tie her slipper. When she came to the sewing room to watch us, as she sometimes did, I saw the patch on her neck, hungry to be touched, and I put my hands under my thighs to sit on them. Ada was sweet, and too talkative, and said things like, "Papa says we live in modern times, and when we go to church in town there is a woman who wears a hat like a ship. What do birds think about when they aren't flying? And Mama says I talk to hear myself talk." When she stood in the doorway the sewing room looked brighter, but it took a moment after she left to remember what brightness is for. Mr. Fitch returned on a day that had promised rain and then backed out of its promise. He came up the steps smelling of horse and tobacco and city dust, and put his thumbs in his vest pockets and appraised things as if he were buying them. He appraised me, and then he appraised Dinah, and then he appraised the dress on the form. When he leaned in close, the green came up to his nose and buffed itself along the inside of it like a cat. "Good," he said, not to me but at me. "It is worth the trip to Louisville for such color. The supper will be on Friday." "It is Wednesday," Mistress Fitch said. "2 days. We cannot." "You will," he said, and he smiled in a way that said the smile was an effect he did not feel. He touched Ada's neck, and left his hand there longer than a father's hand would. And then he removed it, and the ghost of it stayed, pale and white. He sent Jonas down for claret to the cellar, and when Jonas came up, slow with the weight of it, Mr. Fitch cornered him by the stair and took his chin in his hand and lifted it so he could look at Jonas's teeth as if he were a horse. Mr. Fitch liked to estimate. He slept with a ledger under his pillow the way some men sleep with a pistol. We worked into the strange hour of the night, when the house believes its daytime occupants have died, and it does not expect to be seen. The light from the seamstress's lamp makes the edges of things into another set of edges, silver and then darker. Dinah hummed a tune that did not travel the way music travels but stayed and sharpened to pinpoints exactly where it was needed. I learned how she made a stitch into a place. There is a difference between sewing things together and binding them so they speak in each other's mouths. With her the knot at the end of a thread felt like a thought being finished. She breathed on thread before she sent it through the eye, not to wet it, but to tell it where it was going. When the supper night came, the sky broke open right at sundown and let out a rain so hard and sudden, the dust had no time to vanish, but tried and failed and lay there in sheets. The frogs were ecstatic, the kitchen steamed, candles burned useless against the light being thrown by lightning in the windows and mirrors. Everything of that color glowed in the storm. The wallpaper glowed as if from behind. Mistress Fitch's cheeks glowed, the dress did not. It took all that glow into itself and made an edge around her that made her look like a cutout from a handbill pasted onto the night. She did look beautiful, as a person looks when adorned with someone else's appetite. I cannot say I did not feel the thing she wanted me to feel in looking at her, but the breathing I heard from her dress did not belong in any room. Men and women came from every near distance, hat brims slicked with rain, voices fluffed with whiskey and welcome. They stood with one elbow hooked and the other hand fanning, and their talk braided and unbraided. Servants moved along the walls like good shadows. Jonas wore a too-big jacket, and had to roll the cuffs. He watched Dinah with a devotion that made my heart feel like a fist. I should speak now, I think, about fear, about what it is when it begins and when it deepens. Fear does not always arrive as a cry. Often it is a sensation like the damp under a loaf of bread when you lift it. The complexion of the wood changed and soft. If you press a finger in, it gives and holds the shape of your pressing. When Mr. Fitch tapped his glass and the room peered in his direction, I felt that damp softening in the boards. To harvest, he said, to God's abundance, to hope. But his wife then, and the word to her was not a name but the claim of a landholder. To our children seeing us prosper, there were cheers, there were sips. The lightning paused like someone listening. When it returned, it did not come from the sky but from a fixed place, as if inside the house something had decided to be electricity. Mistress Fitch's lips parted. She looked like a girl to herself in the mirror over the mantel. She lifted her skirt to move across the room, and the hem lipped a carpet of hair, silk fringe on a rug, and stuck there, as if it had been hungry for it. She gave a little yelp and laughed and reached back for it, and when her hand touched the place where it stuck, her fingers stayed. "Yugi," Mr. Fitch said, nearly tender. She frowned and laughed again and glanced down and tried to pull her hand away, and the dress took her wrist. Jonas was there in an instant. He did what Jonas always did. He stepped into the space that was about to be empty and he filled it. He took her hand with his and his skin slid against hers, and he hissed, a small sound as if a bit of hot kettle water had spat at him. When he pulled his hand back, the skin along his palm was furred with a dust the exact green of the wallpaper, and there were small punches in the pads of his fingers, not enough to bleed, but enough to speak.
"What is this?"
Mr. Fitch asked to the room, not to any person in it. "What is happening?" In the silence that followed, the house made its sewing noise. No one in that bright room had ever listened for such a sound, so they did not recognize it as the house's work. It dragged and bit and dragged again. A woman at the far end of the table gasped and put her napkin to her mouth, not because she was delicate, but because a thin line of green had crept along her white glove where it touched the table, as if it had taken purchase from her pulse. Someone said. "It's close in here." Another voice. "Is it the storm?" And then, "It's the wallpaper. Dear God, Eugenia, what did you paste in here?" "Paris," Mistress Fitch said, as if she were saying the name of a lover. She put her free hand up to her brow, and the little beads above her lip reappeared, and were not sweat. They were the tiniest bubbles, like lye when it eats fat. Her dress tightened at her chest as if pulled from the back, but no one stood behind her. The rosettes along her bodice came to attention, their little coiled mouths opening in what might have been a smile, if mouths like that could ever smile. One by one the gentlemen went still where they stood as the hems and skirts and tablecloth edges flirted their way against their trousers and shirts, and then fixed small attachments, as if the fabric in the room had been waiting all this time to grow teeth.
"Dinah," Mr. Fitch said. Not the first time he had spoken her name. The first time that day. "Dinah." I had known fear would come with a shout. It came like a cold understanding instead. On the buffet, the knives looked like long silver needles. The women's fans, in that sudden stillness, ticked in the air as if the hands holding them had been wound and would not yet wind down. "Cut her free," a woman said, and then softer, "My God, cut me free," because the sash at her waist had traveled up under the jacket of the man beside her and tied itself to his shirt. And there is a distress particular to being bound to another person unexpectedly, even if you love them. Perhaps particularly if you love them. "Don't touch her," Dinah said, very calmly, and in the same tone someone else might say, "Take care with the kettle." Mr. Fitch turned toward the sewing room door, as if he had always known where she would be when he needed to blame someone. Dinah stood just inside it. She did not look grand. She did not look like a conjure woman who would turn God's wrist. She was long and thin and quiet as always, and what lived in her eyes made you afraid not to listen. "What is this?" he asked her, infringing on her person with his body, taking great mouthfuls of air with the taking. "You asked for a dress that kept out flies," she said, and there was no mockery in it at all. "What have you sewed?" he demanded, presenting himself as a man capable of understanding, if someone would only explain it, because in that house men expected the universe to arrange itself to their minds. "Names," she said. He laughed, a short ugly sound. A man stepping on something he wants to pretend is a stick and not a snake. "Names," he said. "This is not a church naming." "You asked me for the Paris green," she said. "It came in rolls and it eats. I saw what it eats. I saw it kiss the inside of people's mouths and leave them speaking soft like children. I saw it rub itself onto the collar of a girl who hadn't done anything but stand in her own mother's room." She put her iron thimble on the table, gently. It made a little sound, the kind of sound metal makes when it knows it has done what it needed to do. "I put names into the hems so the things that eat could find the mouths they belong to." There was a movement then, like a flock of birds making and unmaking a shape in the air and no one person deciding it. The fabric in the room moved. The wallpaper lifted at the seams with a rustle, as if a wind had put its fingers under it and teased. The men could not step, because their trouser hems were attached, and the women could not step, because they were sewn to the carpet, and the carpet was not fixed to the floor, but it wanted to stay. It had learned staying, and it loved it now. "My daughter," Mistress Fitch said, hoarse for the first time that I had known her. Not a queen or a girl now, but a woman whose child had her hand out at a table she might not reach. "You will stop this." She tried to lunge and the dress held her like an overfull mouth. It tightened along each seam but did not burst. It knew enough of bodies to be clever. Mr. Fitch made a foolish reach for Dinah's arm. He was used to owning everything his eyes fell upon. Jonas moved before I thought. He did not shout. He did not need to. He set himself between them the way he would set himself between an open flame and a child without a thought that the flame would burn. Mr. Fitch's hand landed on Jonas's shoulder and decided it could bear its weight there. He pressed down, and when Jonas's knees wanted to give, he held him anyway, because that is what men like Fitch go to bed until they get good at pressing. "Don't put your hand on him," Dinah said, and then to Jonas, "Soft. Don't let your knees go soft." "Is this witching?" someone said then in the fearful tone that pretends to scoff so it has a place to hide behind. "God above, is this witching in my own house?" Another voice, very small and very reasonable. "It's the dye. There's poison in it. I read of it. It climbs under the skin." The truth was both, and neither. The poison had a name you could learn from the city paper, and the names Dinah stitched had no name you could pronounce in a room like that and go unpunished. I knew then that if I had any love for living, I would wait and choose so carefully when to move it would look like not moving at all. "Cut me," Mistress Fitch said through her teeth, to no one and everyone. "Now, do it." No one moved. The knives were knives. The men were attached to the tablecloth now, and the tablecloth to their cuffs, and their cuffs to the little flouncing tails at the back of the waist, and those to the chair legs, and the chair legs to the carpet, and the carpet to the house itself. A man laughed, and the laugh sharpened and broke and became something with no control over it, a thing that would tear him if it had teeth. "Dinah," Mr. Fitch said, and there was sweat now that was not green at the sides of his face. "I will take your tongue from you with a spoon. I will sell the boy for parts. I will." "Your saying is just wind," she said. "The rest is already stitched." He let go of Jonas to hurt the woman who could not move. This is a thing men will do when they see the one who makes them hungry, standing still. He went for his wife's shoulder. He dug his fingers in. It was the last time he touched anything that belonged to him. The house made one long sound then, a sound I had not known until I heard it, like a needle being pulled out of a very long seam through very stiff cloth, a drag that the arm cannot finish, because the arm is attached to a person, and a person will die before the cloth gives. The wallpaper leaped. There is no other word for it. It tore away from the plaster in long strips that still held at the top and flipped themselves down like laundry from the line. In their turning they were the same color as the vats when the steam throws itself against the air. They peeled and peeled and peeled, and each length that fell stuck to something. A hem, a cuff, a throat. It stuck and it drank. People began to cough in earnest, not delicate coughs but the kind that ring the bell inside the body. I saw a woman make herself very close to the floor along the wall trying to find air where there was none, and the green scolded her for it. I had been waiting to be brave. Bravery came and it was mean. It was not noble. It said keep your hands. It said if you die here you die for people who would count that a fine household story, told for spice at the table. It said save the ones who are yours this hour, and let the others come as they come. "Jonas," I said, "get Ada." He met my eyes and did not say no. He slid along the dining room wall the way water finds its path. He went low. He let his jacket go to the wallpaper rather than fight it, and slithered his arm free like a snake giving up its skin. He went low under the table, where the lace of green had not yet learned to go. His small sharp shoulders carried him. Mistress Fitch saw him go and tried to reach him, and the dress closed a fist around her. His breath sounded like a bellows. Dinah put her hand on my shoulder, and though people had put their hands on me my whole life, this felt like the first hand that knew what a shoulder is for. "Don't get clever," she said. "Be useful. Your fear makes you quick." "I can cut," I said. "You can," she said, "but cut the house first. It is more honest to cut a wall than a woman." I went to the place where the wallpaper held to the lathe. "It is just paper," I told myself. "It is just paper with poison in it. It is just paper with poison and wanting. Wanting is not a substance. Wanting is not a rope." I put the knife in with care because there was no time to be clumsy and still live. Under the paper the plaster was furred with a white bloom that smelt like pennies and apple rot. I slit long mouths open to the lathe. I cut down. The paper screamed without sound. It made something in my ear give way so that everything else sounded far off. I cut down, and where I cut the air moved, and where the air moved the lamps guttered, and where the lamps guttered the shadows did not know how to keep still. "Ruth," Dinah said, and I did not know how she had reached the place she was already at, near the chair where Mr. Fitch had put his hands on Jonas. She had a spool in her hand. It was not wood. I saw it then. It was a vertebra, polished to a shine, the hole drilled with care. The thread wound on it was brown and fine, and it held oil as if someone had touched their hands to it, so the thread would know it belonged to work that mattered. She pulled thread from that spool with her teeth and set it into the iron thimble with a pin so quick the world had to slow to let it happen. She began to stitch in the air. I tell you this and you will say I mean. She moved her hand quickly, and in moving it drew a pattern. No, she made a stitch in the air and the air held it like cloth. She set in another. The hem she was unmaking was not a hem at all but the way the room understood itself, its edge a place it thought it owned.
With each bite and pull, the rug let go of the table leg. With each bite and pull, a cuff loosed. She was a woman who had sewed for other people all her life, and in that hour she sewed for us alone. Mr. Fitch tried to throw himself at her back. The dress at his wife's chest was pulling so tight now that it had climbed the soft notch at her throat, and his hands scrabbled at his own shirt where it had stitched itself to the tablecloth. He looked foolish with his arms out, the way a man looks foolish when he cannot make a hand into a fist because his hand has been made for him. "Dinah," he said again, his voice cracking upward, the boy in it showing. "Mercy. Mercy is a kind of needle," she said. "I have it." Ada's small cry came from under the table. Jonas had her. The green had kissed her arm but only once, and in the shape of a mother's hand. He pulled her free and kept his body between her and everything else, as if his body were a heavy curtain, and he meant to keep the light off her with it. I wanted to weep at him for that. I wanted to ask a God I did not trust to give that child to someone like him when she was older, so she could see what care looks like with no cost attached. Smoke began to crawl along the ceiling. The lamps were not doing it. The smoke came from beneath, from the kitchen, where a dish had slopped and caught, and the woman there had not had time to see to it because her apron ties had traveled up her back and sewn themselves to the door hinge, and she had come apart crying, and then set her mouth and turned, pulled, and ripped her own apron free with a tear that left the ties in the door and the cloth around her waist, and she had put her hands into the dish anyway because that is how saving of any kind is done. It is not elegant. It is not in time with music. It is not even brave. It is only paid for. "Ruth," Dinah said, and I went to her the way I once went to a pastor, because whatever she said would be a kind of prayer I could say, and have it count. "Take the girl," she said. "Take Jonas. Go down the back stair. Don't breathe through your mouth. It kisses that." "What about?" I started, and she cut me off with a look. "You want to save a woman who would not piss on your dress if you were on fire," she said. "That is your own piece of vanity, to be kind in a place where kindness will be smelled like weakness and eaten. Take my boy. Take yourself. If you see a knife kiss you, bite it back." I took Ada. Jonas came with us. We went to the back stair, and the walls there were bare plaster, not papered, and the plaster was sleeping and did not yet know it was wanted. We went down. At the second landing the felt runner was a dream under my feet, soft and wanting. The door at the bottom was latched, and the latch had a loop of linen tied through it because someone had needed something to fasten. The linen caught at my skin and did not want to let go. I pulled and gave some skin, and the door surrendered. The smoke in the back hall was low and serious. When we opened the outer door, it hit the night air like a decision and made more of itself. Rain hit my face with relief that could not last. "Run," I said to Jonas. "To the pecan. Set her under it. Keep your head low." He did not argue. He understood that orders said in a certain voice were not to be bargained with. He ran. Ada ran with him because she was good at being alive even if she had not practiced much. I went back in. I could tell you I did it because I was kind. I did it because I would not be able to eat with the same mouth if I did not. I did it because the smell of sugar and metal and rotten hot wool had gotten under my skin, and I knew I would be sick for all my days. And a sickness wants a story. It can live inside, so it doesn't have to be only itself. The room had kept on binding in my absence. The men's voices had sharpened into blame, then into prayer, then into the noise men make when they remember their bodies are just meat. The house sound was a long contented chew now. It had learned. Mistress Fitch's eyes were not a woman's eyes but a bright animal's. She saw me and had enough of herself left to make a choice. She said hoarse, "Help me." It was the way a queen might say it when the army has broken, and the way a girl might say it when a man's hand is laid on the wrong part of her arm. "I will cut you," I said, and I looked at Dinah, and she nodded once. I slid my hand under the rosettes and felt the seam there humming. Something in it wanted me. It wanted to go into my blood and tell it how to be. I slipped the knife under and I felt it kiss my wrist the way a man who has waited a long time kisses, and I put the knife's edge down like an answer to a question. The seam opened. It sighed. It did not release so much as a little bit, enough to say, "This is me being generous. You must not expect more." "Stand very still," I said, and no one ever told that woman that before in that voice. She did it. Her eyes filled with the smallest tears, not grief but body tears, the kind the body makes when it is trying to keep all its liquids where they belong and there are too many demands on them. I cut carefully, because I have always from a child preferred precision to passion. The rosettes lost their shape and the mouth at her throat closed a little. "How many?" I asked Dinah, because I saw little brown stitches tucked along the hem and I knew that if I cut the wrong ones something would be loosed. I could not gather back. "How many names did you put in?" She met my eyes and gave me more truth than I could hold. "All I could remember," she said, "and some I had to make from what was left of them in me." A part of me believed then that I was the person who would save people and be thanked for it. I told that part to hush. It would lead me into a burning house with a smile and leave me there when it wanted something else to love. I cut. Mr. Fitch cut then too, because he is the sort of man who will do a thing if a woman begins it and the crowd notices, and he thinks he can be seen being the one who thought of it. He cut his own cuffs. He cut the cloth at his waist. He cut until his sense of himself returned, and then he looked around for someone to punish for making him learn a new thing. The fire chubbed its cheeks in the hall. The wallpaper slung itself into it like a lover and they made thick children together. The green in the room lay down on everything it could and did not rise again. The owls outside made the agreement they always make. Who, to whom is this to be owed? To who? It is a question that will put a knife in your hand or lay it down depending on what answer you make. Dinah took her spool and worked a seam that was not in a dress, and I watched the air pucker and then go smooth. She stood with her feet flat and her back long and her face the way a sky looks when weather is coming and has already decided not to go around you. "Go," she said to me when there was time to say nothing else. "Take the girl. Take Jonas. You can carry two. I can carry more than you think, but I am carrying other loads tonight." "I don't," I began, because I did not want to leave her there in that room with those people who did not deserve the mercy of being killed by something so exact as her work. "That dress is not the only seam in this house," she said, and her mouth made a small amused shape then, the first time I had seen her allow herself that. "I pulled a thread a long time ago. I am finishing it now. There are endings and then are finishes. There is a way a person can be ended by a whip that leaves them still standing. There is a way a house can be finished long before the last ember goes cold." I did not understand what she meant until I was on the lawn under the pecan with Utter in my lap and Jonas beside me, and I looked up and saw not the house exactly but the things that made the house declare themselves. The shutters puckered and spat as if they had tongues. The smoke found the owl tree and put itself into the hollows of it and watched us watching. Through a place where the wallpaper had gone entirely, I saw the raw lathe and plaster and the little square of the attic door and the rawhide thong. It hung slack. Someone had opened it. I knew then about the cool breath on the back of the neck and the drafts and the reason why the house always felt like a bin full of cloth with something under it breathing. There were rooms that had not been rooms. There were rooms that had been rooms for people no one had said existed. The attic door swung and then there were people there at the roofline where a person has no business standing if the house is a place that means you no harm. There were people with hard shapes of heads and dark eyes that reflected firelight. They moved the way a person moves who has not often been given permission to move where others can see them. They moved down the slope of the roof and along the gutter the way a seam goes along the edge of cloth, small even steps. Dinah had pulled a thread. I knew then that the names she had stitched were not just to aim a poison, they were to open a door. "Go to the back," she called toward the pecan through the window over the dining room. She stood in that light like a long straight stitch through two pieces of the same cloth. Go to the big house's chicken yard. The gate's cut. She did not call the yard by the name Mr. Fitch used for it. It is a thing you must learn to do if you are to live. You call something by a name that tells what it really is, not what it wants to be called. Jonas took Ada's hand before I could, and they ran. I ran behind them, not because I was brave, but because I had picked my path and it led that way. And once you put your foot on a path like that, if you step off it, you are not a person you could bear to sit with later. Behind us, the room where the supper had been went to its knees. We came to the chicken yard and the cut in the fence like a letter in a hem. It took the eye a moment to find it. It had been done with a thin, sharp thing. We went through. We did not get glass in our ankles. The world beyond the fence was another color, lighter somehow, though the rain had stopped and the night was dark as a well. People came out through gaps that had not been gaps. A woman had a baby in one arm and a basket on the other. A man had a bloody hand and his other hand had the whip handle in it. Not because he would use it now, but because it had always been in his hand and he had forgotten how to put it down. There was a procession. There was no panic, because panic is for when people still have choices to make and they are bad at choosing. These people had planned their legs for walking. Ada asked if we were going to town. I told her we were going to the river and that her mother would meet her there. My mouth said that, and my mouth knew it was lying and hated me for it. I would explain to that mouth later that keeping a child's legs moving is sometimes the difference between her being a child the next day and not. We went by a tobacco barn. The leaves there hung like hides. Their smell was sweet and brown and calming, the way some churches smell, and it made me understand how men trick themselves into thinking they are kind when they are only quiet. We went to the tree line. We went into the cane brake. The cane closed behind us and the frogs thought we were rain and sang. By the time we came to the river, people had sorted themselves. There were boats. There were not enough. There were always not enough, and sometimes not enough is as much as anyone gets. A man in a boat held it to the bank with a pole that had seen this work before. His arms were the arms of a person born to river. He had the face of a person born to someone who lived with certainty, and he had traded that certainty for what he was doing now, and he was not sorry to have done it, not sorry at all. That made the lines around his mouth beautiful. 2 at a time, he said, and he did not need to say it again. The first boat shoved off. It was odd, the silence. There were no dogs. The men who kept the dogs were in the house with the green in their throats and their women's skirts in their hands. You do not hear silence when you expect to hear dogs until your body tells you it had been listening for dogs since it was born. Jonas put Adada into a boat. He looked at me. It is a mean thing the way a look can ask you to be a person you do not know how to be yet. I nodded. He put his hand on the boat's gunwale and then he took it away because he thought my being on this boat will make another person have to wait. He looked me over as if I were a scene he was checking for truth. He shook his head. No, he said to me. You get in. She will sit between your legs. I will come after. I'm begun, and he put his hand on my elbow the way a person puts a hand on a hinge. You go. If I die here, I will die the way I want to. You go. I got in. Ada got in with me and tucked herself into a place that felt like a seat a person had found before. The boatman pushed us off with the pole and the river took us. When the pole left the bank, it sounded like a stitch pulled free from a heavy fabric. The river took that and made a path of it. On the other shore, the trees did not look like the trees we had left. You can say that about any crossing if you have a mind to be dramatic, but it was true. The trees on that side were men who did not know our names and did not need to, because they had looked a long time at the spot where a woman like Dinah would appear carrying her own spool of bone. I turned to look back. The house was not a house, but a place where light and green and smoke had decided to dress themselves. It sagged like heavy cloth on a line in rain. For a moment a figure stood at the top of the steps, long and thin. She lifted her hand once, not a wave, but the way you put a hand up to measure distance. A shape crossed her, then a shadow, an owl, then two, then three. The great birds' heads turned. They made the small question at the end of their call. Who? Who? She stood there and they stood for a moment, and then the roof leaned. The roof decided not to be anymore. It let go of being roof. Things came down that had belonged to the house but would now be things that lay underground and grew a different kind of mold. Ada slept with her mouth open on the far bank. In the morning she would call for her mother in a smaller voice than she had used before. In the morning I would begin to tell her a story a person can live with, and I would try not to lie too much in it. Men would search. They would beat the cane. They would write in the paper that bandits came, or that a storm struck, or that God had punished theft with fire, because God in those papers always punishes the wrong people in a tidy way. Mr. Fitch would die or not. If he lived, he would buy new paper. If he died, his brother would say the house had been badly built, and that it was time to turn to brick. Wherever I went I would find hems with tiny brown stitches in them, names made from the sound of a heart remembering. I would feel the poison of green in my gums when the weather turned, and I would say to myself that these are the taxes a person pays for living in a country where such a night can be had. In the weeks after, I saw Dinah twice. Once, at a distance, in a market in a place that was not this place, her back straight, her head wrapped in a cloth the color of a river sky. I did not go to her because there were men who watched people like me watching people like her. I carried my cloth in my arms and walked by, and the small bones in my feet went soft with wanting to run to her. She did not turn. She did not need to. The second time I saw her in a hems, I had gone to Louisville and found work in a dress shop where the proprietor believed in style so exactly that he did not notice the people who formed themselves around those styles so they could have names to speak. A woman came in with her girl and put her hand on the green bolt and said, "That color, please." I swallowed, and I could not stop myself. I leaned over the counter and I said in the voice of someone who knows a thing you should listen to, "It is not safe for the child." She blushed as if I had said something private. "I do not plan to feed her the dress," she said, and there was a bitterness there that told me she had eaten bitterness all her life and could not see how she had been fed it. I went to the bolts and chose instead a blue that did not glow in the dark. I put it on the counter and said, This brings out the child's eyes, and that is what women who would not be told a truth would listen to." She looked at the blue and then back at the green, and she began to move her mouth as if counting coins in there. I lifted the blue a little to make the light go along it, and she nodded because she wanted to be a person who chose for beauty, and not for fashion, which is perhaps a beginning. That night I hemmed the blue dress, and when I turned it to tie off the thread, there it was. A fine little seam of brown on the underside, made so small and patient you'd think it had always belonged there. I brought it to my lips, which is the closest thing to praying I have left. The letters spelled out what I thought they would spell. I bit the end and unthreaded the needle. I did not take it out. I put my own stitch beside it, crooked and nowhere near as fine a rude neighbor to that grace. I added a letter I could offer. I folded the hem back and pressed it with my palm and felt the pulse of it like a small animal passing under the skin. At night, alone, I sleep with a length of thread wrapped around my smallest finger. Sometimes it burns me awake. Sometimes I wake, and my mouth tastes like pennies and apples, and the inside of a copper kettle, and I say the names I can remember into my palm, and then I put my palm to the place where my ribs meet, and ask it to carry them somewhere. A woman with a spool of bone can use them. When I walk past a pecan tree, I look up. More often than you'd think, it looks back. The owls still make their calls, and every now and then, at the end of that hollow phrase, something like a laugh comes out of them that has no malice in it, only the joy a thing feels when the job it took on a long time ago is moving a little closer to done.
If you wear a new dress, and it feels like a hand on you and that hand tightens, reach under and feel for the fine work. You may find a word there. You may find that your throat is not the only throat in the room. You may decide to keep it there. You may decide to take it out with your teeth and carry it in your cheek until you find the hem it belongs to. That is your choice. It is what you have among other things been given. The house in Kentucky is ashen green dust now, and there is grass where the carpet remembers being laid. Men tell its story at tables, and make themselves the brave ones in it. I do not argue with them because there is more than one kind of bravery needed to make a world that is not so hungry all the time. When I sit at my table now, and the streetcar bells talk to one another beyond the window, sometimes a small sound joins them, the sound of a needle, worrying a thread. It is not a haunting. It is the house teaching itself to be something kinder. It is the sound of cloth deciding to open. It is the sound owls make with their throats when they see a woman at a distance, lift her hand, measure the space between them, and choose to travel it or not. If you listen, it is saying the same word it has always said, and you can answer it if you know how. You say your name in a voice you would use to stitch with. You say who, and this time you say who back.